Hey all, I'm here to go over the right answers to the practice questions that you all did. Definitely missing you guys. Wish I was doing this with you guys in person, but we got to do what we got to do. Hopefully, going over this, if there are any that you're confused about, helps you with the test. Let me just run through it and kind of make sure you get the right answers here. So, number one. Which of the following shifts could put us in recession? So the answer here is both a decrease in aggregate demand and a decrease in aggregate supply. And so the way you got to look at it, if you're thinking about the graph, remember the GDP is on the x-axis or on the horizontal axis. And if either of those curves shifts to the left, that shifts GDP to the left and makes it decrease. GDP decreasing is a recession. Of course, question two then is going to be the opposite. Expansion is going to be an increase in aggregate demand and an increase in aggregate supply. So that would shift both curves to the right, moving GDP to the right, making it increase, and that's expansion. Fiscal policy is the government. And again, when we say the government, we're talking about the president and Congress, and they change taxing and spending. Okay, so taxing and spending. The opposite, which we'll see in a second, is monetary policy. Not the opposite, but a very different animal is monetary policy. So fiscal policy is the government changing taxing and spending. When we're in recession, they want to put more money in people's pockets. The option that puts more money in people's pockets is D, spend more and tax less. Either way, people get more money and ideally they spend it, and it boosts us out of a recession. If they were to do that during a recession, their goal would be to increase aggregate demand. Now, remember, it's a demand thing because we're talking about giving people money. People have money, they spend it. You're talking about spenders or buyers. That's a demand thing. And of course, in recession, they want to increase it so that they boost the economy. If fiscal policy was taken during expansion, the goal would be to decrease aggregate demand. By decreasing aggregate demand, it cools the economy off and specifically brings inflation down, which is sometimes the concern during expansion. Number seven, the automatic stabilizer here is going to be letter C, more people claiming unemployment benefits. We already have an unemployment system set up. If the government takes no specific action, that happens. The other three options are all specific actions by the government or the Fed. Number eight, who controls monetary policy? Monetary policy is the Fed, and that's how they change the money supply. We learned about that last unit. I reminded you of it this unit, but that's monetary policy. During a recession, they want to put more money in the economy. Again, same thing as with the government. They want to put more money in people's pockets. And if you remember from last unit, money supply goes up, interest rates go down. And so that's letter B for number nine. If the Fed used monetary policy during expansion, again, inflation is the concern here. What curve would they shift? And similar to the government, they would also be decreasing aggregate demand. Whether the government or the Fed get involved, it's both a demand thing because you're talking about either putting money in people's pockets or taking money out of people's pockets. Question 11 then, the classical approach. The idea here is the government does nothing. Okay, you can call it the conservative approach, where the government essentially says we're going to let the market fix itself. All right, so it's classical. Number 12. The Phillips curve represents the relationship between inflation and unemployment. Of course, if you look at the graph right below it, a little bit hard to read there, but you see rate of wage inflation essentially, and unemployment on this axis. So that's what it's measuring. Given the Phillips curve, what curve would have shifted to take us from point A to point B? So if you're looking on that aggregate supply, aggregate demand graph that we did at the beginning of the unit, if you decrease aggregate demand, that's going to make inflation go down and unemployment go up. So aggregate demand must have decreased in order to make that happen. All right, number 14, if the government wanted to lower unemployment, the trade-off would be, in other words, they're trying to get unemployment to go down. Of course, we know that typically there's an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. So if you make unemployment go down, inflation will probably go up. You can see that on the curve. Let's say you're at B and you want to make unemployment go from 4% to 2%. You can do that, but look what happens to inflation. It goes from 3% to 5% as you move from B to A. So that's the trade-off, if you want to call it that. And then lastly, number 15, if aggregate supply shifts, where do we move to? So we start at point A, and it says aggregate supply suddenly increases. That is going to move us inside the curve. It's going to make inflation go down and unemployment go down. So it's going to be off the curve and to the left. Okay, remember, supply shifts do not fit the Phillips curve. They take us off the curve. And if we submit that, it should be a 15 out of 15 if I'm worth my moxie. And it says I got 15 out of 15. So there you go. I hope that helps. Again, if there's anything that you're specifically struggling with still, feel free to give me a shout. I'd be happy to walk you through it. But otherwise, good luck on your test, and I hope that y'all are staying healthy and happy.